another episode of Medical Experts in Football. I'm your host, Taiwo, a physical therapist and sports journalist. Now, I don't want to waste any time because truly, today is a special episode. My guest, Matt Midkiff, is a sports PT, but also the owner/director at Foothills Sports Medicine in Gilbert-Mesa, Arizona. And he's also a longtime youth soccer coach in the Valley, so he spends a lot of time on the soccer pitch, which is where one of his twin daughters suffered a cardiac event earlier this year. But before we talk about her incredible recovery, of course, gotta throw in some Arizona, the first state that I started to practice as a physical therapist, where I met him, and our Phoenix Rising FC experience meeting the legend Didier Drogba. Enjoy the episode, but make sure you don't miss the important takeaway messages for each and every person tuning in. You being in Arizona for a very long time, give you some trivia, and then you're going to tell us a little bit about Arizona. So my question is, there is one point, I believe, in the U.S. where you can be in 4 states at one time, and it's in Arizona. What is it called?
It is. Yeah, it's the Four Corners area. And I am struggling for the name.
Of the states?
Well, the states are obviously Arizona, and New Mexico, and Utah, and Nevada.
And Colorado.
Colorado.
Close.
We played some ODP games way back in the day in the little New Mexico city right on the Four Corners area, which I remember quite fondly. So that was quite a drive to get up there, and it poured like half the day. So yeah, Four Corners, Arizona. I got 3 of the 4 states. So
great job. Now I do hear that it's, I mean, if you're not in that area, it's a pretty rural area. It's not necessarily worthwhile visiting if you're not nearby. Is that pretty accurate for you?
I would say for you trivia and geography buffs to put 2 hands and 2 feet into 4 different states all at the same time, you can say that you did that in a lifetime. If you're going to go there and have fun outside of that, there's nothing there. So
all right. Now, because daylight savings time is coming up very soon, and me having lived in Arizona for 3 years, it was amazing not observing it. Just could live my life. But at one point, Arizona did observe daylight saving times a long time ago, but they permanently decided not to because they felt that extra hour was, with it being so hot and sunny, was expending even more energy. What do you think would surprise most people about Arizona, the desert state?
I think the daylight savings one is a good call. I think the other thing that would surprise people is it snows a lot in Arizona. Not in Phoenix, but if you drive an hour and a half, 2 hours north up to Prescott Flag and the other side of the state, Show Low, Payson, there's a lot of skiing, there's a lot of snow. So for a desert state to have snow and ski resorts within 2 hours of Phoenix, I think would surprise a lot of people.
I agree. Now, I'm assuming that Arizona is home for you, but I actually don't think so. Where is home for you again?
So I grew up in Asheville, North Carolina, which is western side of the state, most famous for the Vanderbilt Mansion, which is the biggest residential house in the country, or at least was at the time, like 59 bedrooms, crazy insane. So my dad was a teacher at a boarding school, and I grew up on campus there. That boarding school moved to Columbia, South Carolina. And so I was there for 3 years, finished sophomore through senior high school there, and then got recruited to play soccer out in Santa Barbara. So I went to a small school called Westmont College in Santa Barbara, California, which was beautiful, amazing. And then in the time being, my sister moved out to Arizona. So I came back here for grad school. So I've been in Arizona since. Somebody gave me a job, and now someone gave me a physical therapy clinic and said, hey, you should stay here and try to run a business. So that's what I've been doing ever since.
All right. So North Carolina, being from the South, I'm right in Georgia, so from the South too. North Carolina is definitely a nature state. Arizona also has a lot of nature, but snakes are very common in the southwest of Arizona. And I had a very scary incident when I was in Arizona studying on Mayo Clinic's campus. And I remember someone pointed out there was like a huge snake right next to me. I was at this bench
just studying. And since that day, I just never studied outside because that really freaked me out. Do you have any scary snake stories?
Well, I'll give you one from back in North Carolina. So out in Arizona, rattlesnakes are a big thing. Back in North Carolina, copperheads are kind of the big poisonous snake. So I was running our cross country trail, and I remember running uphill and seeing one in my path, and it's a race, and gosh, do you stop? Or I mean, what? Like I kind of want to win. So I remember in absolute terror hopping over this copperhead, and I'd never seen one out and about outside of like a nature center, and hoping that if I spooked it, it was gonna bite the guy chasing me from behind, and not me. So it didn't get me.
Okay.
I don't know if it got the guy behind me, but I did beat him that day, so maybe it did.
Yeah.
And then we actually we had a week where we found a little in Arizona, a garden snake in our pool. And then my wife texted me a picture the next day. There was a little one in our house in one of the kids' bedrooms.
Oh,
and then another little one. And then I don't know what happened. We never saw mama or dad. And I had a PT student that was staying over near Los Sendas over these last 8 weeks with a friend, and she had a couple come in their house. So it was freaking her out too. So that was, gosh, like 4 years ago. So it's not a common thing, but
and it just crept out. It just crept out of the house.
Yeah, I'm guessing mom had babies around the back pool area, and then maybe she only had 3, and all 3 of them are with Jesus now. So those 3 are definitely not on this earth. So.
Well, not to scare folks that want to come to Arizona. There's a lot of great things about Arizona. One in particular, Arizona is known as a Grand Canyon state. And when I was in Arizona, I probably went to the Grand Canyon 2+ times. And sometimes people wanted to come, and I told myself, I can't go to the Grand Canyon every time someone comes. Now, the Arizona Grand Canyon, what makes it worthwhile visiting for tourists?
Yeah, I think if you see pictures, it looks cool. And you could say if you've never been there, it's just a big hole in the ground, but like the enormity of it is amazing. The colors of it when the sun reflects off of it is amazing. The amount of things there are to do there, from just walking around the rim to some of the more national monument parks of it, and then ultimately if you ever get a chance to hike down into Havasupai and go down in the canyon, and the waterfalls that are down there are amazing. They're beautiful, and you just got to hit it at the right time of year. I think if you're from outside of Arizona and you try to make your voyage down into the middle of the Grand Canyon during the summer, it's not going to go well for you. So no matter how tough you think you are and how fit you think you are, if you're gonna try to go 11 to 14 miles down in the canyon and get back up and still be alive at the end of that journey, that's probably not a good thing. So definitely pick like
what months?
October, February, I mean March-ish. October and March, if you're gonna try to get before the snow or after the snow, and still have really cool weather, is awesome. I've been to the canyon in July, just the perimeter part. So if you want to go down and in it, you need to do it in a time where it's not super cold and it's not super hot, and your sweet spot months are going to be coming out of winter and going into winter.
Great to know. And then with Havasupai, make sure you get the reservations, because I have tried for many years. Very difficult to get, but I'm still hopeful I will be there one day in Arizona. Yeah. Now, you're in the Phoenix area. Besides Grand Canyon, what other places would you recommend a tourist to check out, particularly nature sites? Because Arizona, believe it or not, there's a lot of natural parks and things to do.
Yeah, I mean the nature part within the Phoenix area, just general hiking, Camelback. The Camelback hikes are great. Payastoa Peak is nice and an easy one, with great views at the top. You've got tons of trails in the Papagos, and as you go out to the Superstition Mountains, even out towards Gold Canyon, which is east side of town, the Lost Dutchman Trail, and all the perimeter little mountain ranges are great hikes. You have another avenue you can go if you're coming as mom and dad. You can go let your husband golf at one of 1,000 golf courses, and you can go shopping in Scottsdale. That's always a good way to go. Nature sometimes is a Armani store for some people, and Camelback Country Club for golf.
Cool. Well, I can't waste too much time because there are much more important topics about you, your work, your family that I really want to get to because I know your time is very precious. But first, to open it up, what does soccer mean to you? Because you are a former collegiate soccer player, you're a clinic director, physical therapist working with athletes, and you're very well known in the Arizona soccer community as a staff for Arizona Arsenal Soccer Club. How has soccer shaped you into who you are today?
Yeah, it's one of those things that's just kind of become part of my life since I was young. Growing up in North Carolina, I actually wanted to play baseball when I was little, and my parents went out to Little League games, and the parents were just nuts. And they're like, we're not going to put our kid in this environment. And growing up on a boarding school campus, obviously it's smaller boarding school, so they had no football program, so soccer was the big fall sport. They registered me for a YMCA program when I was 5, and then from there got into club soccer and went on. And being in a small school, I played multiple sports: tennis, basketball. I ran cross country and track. And soccer is by far my best sport. Carrying that into college was amazing. And as I got closer to PT school, it was kind of like, do I want to continue to play soccer or just focus on school? And I was training to play on the team that is now Phoenix Rising, and had a coach up in the North Valley come over to me going, hey, watch out here. A few times we have a spot open for coaching at our club. And I knew nothing about club soccer at the time in Arizona. And he was one of the coaching directors at the Sereno Soccer Club. I interviewed for a job the next week. I decide, hey, my playing days are over, but this would be super fun, and hopefully I can do this as I go into PT grad school. So a week later, I'm coaching a team and training 7 others. Find out that Sereno Soccer Club is one of the top clubs in the country. So I kind of walk into a good situation and coach boys for about 7 years. As I start that journey, I go to grad school. I went to AT Still University here in town because it was the only PT program in town. Now I think there's 5 or 6 as we speak, but back then it was the only one in town, and I didn't want to stop coaching. And ultimately it worked out really, really well. They kind of tweaked my schedule so I can get to the labs that I needed to. So throughout grad school, I'm still coaching competitively. Honestly, the first week I'm practicing as a PT, I get a couple of calls from coaches who want to send me their players. And honestly, I mean, all of us have that imposter syndrome when we graduate from school, where we're like, yeah, I have no idea what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And why would you want to see me when there's someone across the room that's been practicing 15 years?
Mm-hmm.
But you're like, soccer player, soccer family, people I've known for years. Great. So that synergy started building, and that led to me starting coaching girls soccer. It wasn't something I planned to do, but and obviously the female athlete and injuries and ACLs and ankles are a thing, and the injury rate's higher. So that really led, as it relates to physical therapy, to more post-operative patients, more ACLs, and developing relationships with our families and our club with orthopedic surgeons who do those kind of surgeries. I would say soccer is just kind of part of life and part of our family's life. My kids have never been kids that we forced to play or even pushed in that direction. They just kind of picked up their soccer bag, asked to buy cleats and a ball, and wanted to go to the field. Watching your kids play soccer and them playing as bad as they could possibly play, it's still an amazing day of watching your kids do something they love and grow from that experience.
Like me, soccer has just been a part of my life. We aren't going to get into too much physical therapy, but I do want to throw it out there, especially for my folks who are out in Arizona. He is a clinic director at Foothills Sports Medicine in Gilbert-Mesa. Highly recommend him. So if you happen to be in Arizona looking for a therapist, check him out. But it also happens to be the company I started as a PT and completed my residency there. One thing that attracted me to Foothills Sports Medicine was, at the time, you all had a partnership with Phoenix Rising FC. And I don't know if you remember, but even when I was first a student, I came to your clinic because Matt Hubble was like, oh, you got to meet Matt Midkiff. He does a lot with soccer. And of course you said, oh yeah, come by to the clinic. And then when I finally moved to Arizona, I reached out to you and I said, hey, can I shadow you while you treat some of the professional soccer players? And you were so generous. And I just want to bring up this moment before we get into the story that many people, even myself, I want to kind of hear about, was my Didier Drogba moment. Because when I was in the training room, I was so focused, you know, as a new grad. I remember, and I know I have high expectations for myself, and I knew where I was trying to get to. And I was just so focused and in tune on everything you were doing because I wanted to take everything in. And with the residency, expected to know so much. But at the moment, Didier Drogba walks in the training room. He introduces himself, shakes my hand, and then goes on, does that to everyone else. And at the moment, it didn't even faze me that was him until afterwards. I was like, that was Didier Drogba. I can't believe I didn't even get a pic, like, no, nothing. I am curious, what was your first moment like, an impression meeting him? Because I didn't get a real nice experience, even though I was right there.
You know, I would say it's somewhat similar.
Yeah.
You know, I was treating one of the athletes in the training room, and it's a great culture that had trickled down for him, where when the players came in, they would walk around to the equipment manager, the physical therapist, the athletic trainers, the coaches, and shake everyone's hand to start the day. It all started with him, and if you see this larger than life, one of the iconic soccer players of the last 10 years come in and do that, everybody else is going to do it. And Didier says to do it. So I remember treating someone, my back is to the front door. This guy comes to me and he slaps me on the back, and I turn around to shake his hand, and he goes, "Are you okay?" And I just look like straight up, and I'm like 5'8", and the man is huge and has this ginormous hand that is enveloping mine, and you're like, "I'm great, Didier. How are you?" And he's like, I'm good. And he just kind of slaps me on the back, and that was him every day. Like he would walk around and shake everyone's hand. He was a player that obviously set the tempo of training sessions, and absolutely every single player that was there loved the fact that they got to play with one of the legends of soccer, and it was a great experience to be part of the end of his career, and part of an amazing season that year too for the Phoenix Rising, and even the next one after that he had moved on, and their winning streak, which is the most number of wins in one single season. So really cool experience meeting Didier, definitely at the top of that list for sure.
Now, before we discuss the cardiac event your daughter experienced on the soccer field earlier this year, first, how are your teenage twins doing, Pyper and Emery?
Yeah, they're doing well. They are back playing. They're back playing at the ECNL level. They've been training for a while. They've been playing in games over the last 6-8 weeks, I think, at this point, and really haven't had any negative experiences to date. We even went to Disney World a few weeks ago for my grandmother's 100th birthday, and they rolled roller coasters and did adventure rides, which I don't think is supposed to be a thing for kids that have gone through what they have in their heart conditions. But they're reintegrating to life, and mentally, I think there's still some challenges as it relates to a little bit of fear, but they're handling it well, and we're getting them help when they need it, and they're back to now at this point being fun, precocious, very opinionated, willful 13-year-olds.
Yeah, I can't wait.
But healthy and back to life as it was 8 months ago.
Yeah. And 8 months ago, that was April 27, 2023, to be exact. Probably a day you'll never forget, a day filled with so many emotions. And you were coaching at the same soccer complex when your daughter Pyper had that cardiac arrest on a different soccer pitch. Thankfully, many acted fast, I believe. I can't think of it. Anissa and Lindsay, probably others who were there to start CPR immediately. Now, you told a news outlet that you'd rather not remember the details as clearly, but if there's one memory you hold dear to you of that day, what would it be?
Yeah, good question. I think of anything, and as much as you want to say I don't want to remember the details, they're always there for you. And the one that gets me the most is trying to absorb what was going on as I'm checking Pyper's pulse as she's having a cardiac arrest and not finding one, and she's turning blue and kind of getting foamy stuff around her mouth, and it just kind of goes from what is going on? Did she get hit in the head? Did she what did she have a seizure? Because we didn't know that they had a genetic heart condition at all, so you're trying to process that. And it was, I mean, honestly, just kind of screaming at Pyper to just fight.
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't have anything else to do or say. I'm just like, hey, just fight, and really process what was going on. Anissa Pongrantz, one of the soccer parents, was doing CPR. She's on the phone with 911, and the lady's taking her through everything. And then the lady gets to a point where she's like, now stop and, check for pulse and airway. And I just kind of yell at Anissa. And honestly, in the moment, I didn't even know who it was. It was this lady in sunglasses and a hat next to me. It wasn't until later that night that someone told me who was doing CPR on Pyper. I knew when Lindsay took over, but the soccer parent I didn't recognize at the time, and I just kind of yelled at her and just don't stop. And she's like, I'm not going to stop. And then just kind of yelling for the, where's the paramedics, where's the EMS. But the moment always get me is just checking for a pulse and not finding one, and seeing her color change and just yelling at her not to stop, and kind of yelling at everybody to keep going and get things in line. But I mean, whether you have faith or not, a soccer parent that's never at practice, that is very trained in CPR, because she is a former PT and now works for her husband's medical company, but to have her there because she had to drop something off at the field. Otherwise, it's typically a dad crew at those training sessions that would have had no idea what to do. If they're listening, all due respect, but Anissa being there, in the one time that she was ever there, and having to wait around at the beginning of practice to check some emails on her phone before she got in her car. And then this event happens with Pyper, for her to be able to do that. And then Lindsay's new to our club. She's a registered nurse. When I got over to the field, it was, do I shove this lady out of the way and just do CPR myself? You're not supposed to treat your own family, but at the same time, if she's not going to make it, you want it to be not making it in your hands. But she seemed to have everything sorted out. And then Lindsay came over when Anissa got tired. It's probably 10 to 12 minutes before the medics got there. But they obviously did CPR as perfectly as could have been done to give Pyper a chance to survive in that moment.
And I feel like, even though they're not directly part of your family, but those people will definitely always hold a special place for your family, I imagine.
100%. How could, it's funny, when Pyper woke up, she's like, what do I, when they're coming to visit, what do I tell the people that saved my life? And I'm like, well, we'll start with thank you. But I remember the first game back to the fields for me was when Pyper was still in the hospital, and I had to take Landry because she's playing for me, and my team was in the middle of this national championship run, and so I felt like it'd be cathartic for me, and obviously we didn't want Landry to feel like she wasn't getting the attention she needed as our older daughter there. So I go out to the fields. I didn't know how I'd feel. We're doing ECNL games, and I saw Lindsay right away because she's one of our ECNL coaches, and she's assisting on my team that year. And so I kind of got that out of the way. And but Anissa, her daughter's team was playing next, and she's on the Twins team. So at that point, obviously Pyper was in the hospital. Emory, we had shut down, wasn't playing. But I knew them. I knew I couldn't go over and talk to Anissa before their game because I had to focus on coaching, and but after the game was able to go over, and lots of hugs, lots of tears, and obviously Lindsay and Anissa will be two people that will always be part of our family, and obviously, would love in some way to repay them at the level that they deserve. But how do you do that? So, without them, Pyper's not here, our family's not whole. So, Lindsay is a nurse, so she's done CPR on many people, but I've known her since she was 10, 11 years old, and she babysat the twins when they were super little, she and her sister. So I know for her it's a very special thing because of that. And Anissa is the most unassuming lady in the world. So to get extra attention like she's gotten for all this is not her norm, but we're amazingly appreciative, forever indebted.
Now, going back to that moment, you talked about how Pyper had lost her pulse, and you were there shouting probably at everyone and anyone, even the random folks out there, to keep fighting. She was flown to Phoenix Children's Hospital, where she was listed as stable. Like, what do you remember about your daughter's recovery?
Well, the starting part. So we get there. She had been diverted to Mountain Vista Hospital because she had lost her pulse in the ambulance again. So that was the closest hospital. We raced over there, and by then she had been stabilized. She was intubated and being prepared for the helicopter ride. So we get there, we get checked in, and try to assess like the gravity of everything. And so ultimately we knew we were going to stay the night. So I told my wife I'd drive home and get stuff, get clothes and food, and I would come back to the hospital. So I drive back, and when I get up to the when I get up to the waiting room outside of the PICU, the pediatric ICU, I see these two doctors like sitting like bent over talking to my wife. And as someone who's watched many medical TV shows, it felt like that conversation. It felt like that conversation of your daughter's not going to make it, or she's not going to make it, and would you consider like organ transplant? That's what it looked like. So that was one of the scariest, I think, moments of the whole hospital stay, was that immediate like trying to process what was going on. They call me over, they start talking very softly, and I quickly realized that they want Pyper to be part of this study where they're going to super cool her body for a period of time, which is similar to what they do with spinal cords. Is what they did with Damar Hamlin, Christian Eriksen, Dennis Bird, football player in the past, spinal cord. So I'm kind of in this moment of, wait, that's what you want? Yeah, just where do we sign and you can start? So that was the start of the process. So they super cooled Pyper for 4 days. She was
and just so people are aware, the super cooling was to kind of help keep her organs as normal and minimize the damage. Is that
minimize the damage to her heart and brain and everything internal, which at that point we didn't know. We didn't know truly how long she had lost oxygen to her brain. They quickly hooked her up to an EEG. Obviously, she was on an EKG monitor. Because of the supercooling part, and they were not getting any response other than normal reflexes, they decided to give her a paralytic so that she would be as comfortable as possible. And we knew that would be kind of a 4-day process. So the first 4 days were nurses coming in and out, looking at her heart monitor, her EKG, reassessing vitals and reflexes, and then walking on. So my wife would go home with the other 2 kids, because kids aren't allowed to stay in the hospital at night, and then I would sleep there. Which was a pretty tough experience on the sleeping arrangements in hospital rooms. But it was those 4 days that were challenging, because there was really nothing else to do other than to pray. And we had people that were coming by. I probably got 500 texts within, and DMs within like 6-8 hours, and started getting calls from news stations and such. So it was just a lot to process, to handle all of that, and then just be there and be waiting for what was going to happen. Day 5, she's being weaned off of the cooling device and weaned off of the paralytic. They wanted to reassess her responsiveness. And when she woke up, she was delusional and seeing visions of lots of stuff. And that was always the concern, right? Of when she wakes up, how's she going to be? Is she going to be able to wake up? Is she going to be able to wake up and be the same? Is what we're seeing that day one going to be how she's going to be for the rest of her life? Where she thinks her, hands are fake and there's the room is burning and all this other stuff. And so that was a lot to take in, that fifth day in the hospital and first day that she was cognizant. But they did a cardiac and brain MRI the next day. It came back relatively good. There were some blips in her short-term memory centers. Each day was a little bit better than the last. Short-term memory was definitely the thing that was struggling with. She wouldn't remember people that came by the day before. But her waking up that second day and remembering stuff was a lot for her, because as she started to regain her faculties and she's looking at having lost 5 days of her life and looking at all these balloons and Stanleys and teddy bears in a room, and looking at her phone, and she's got all these messages and people wish, like, the two questions are what happened and when can I go home? Like, how long do I have to be here? And those were pretty much over and over, and definitely a lot of tough tears, but happy tears that she was a lot different than the day before. And each day kind of built on itself. The PICU, the nursing staff up there was amazing, absolutely amazing. I think,
and this was all still at Phoenix Children's?
All at Phoenix Children's.
Okay.
She was there 15 days. And she wasn't going to leave the hospital until she got a defibrillator and pacemaker. So that was just part of her condition with hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. Standard of care for someone who's had a cardiac arrest at her age is receiving a defibrillator and pacemaker. And so we knew that would kind of be the end part of her stay there. They moved her down to the cardiac ward, I think, on day 12. We were there a couple of days as we waited for her surgery. And in the time being, getting siblings tested, sisters tested, and parents tested, and all that kind of fun stuff to see what else was going on and what else we needed to do. But the 15-day stint, I will say this: there was the greeter security guy named Anthony that was a shining light with Phoenix Children's, greeted everyone, told everyone he's praying for him. Big guy with a big heart. They had counselors there, one of which was one of my former players that I had coached like 10 years ago, that taught people how to talk to kids coming out of a coma, how siblings could manage seeing their sisters in that kind of state, guests and young guests coming in and talking to them. So the whole staff at Phoenix Children's was great. The specialists were awesome. The ICU docs were great. Made those 15 days as bearable as possible.
Yeah. Well, that's great. And we're going to talk about hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, and obviously certainly the process of not only Pyper, but Emery also kind of having that defibrillator. That moment in Phoenix Children's Hospital, you did mention that Pyper and both, they're doing very well. Overall, what do you credit to that? Is it nearly full recovery? Oh, wow, that's great.
Full recovery is always relative, right? Because they have a heart condition. So, and that heart condition does have the ability to be progressive, and generally is in some respects. If I would credit a few things. Number one, I'm a Christian man of faith, and just all the prayers going and support for our family was amazing. Like I said, for 4 days, that's all we had. And that's why, we were as open with the story as possible, because we needed as many people praying for our daughter as possible, because it's all we had. I'm not a doctor treating her, and I had no say in anything other than, trusting the people that were put in front of us. Being a physical therapist and working with a lot of the top orthos in town, immediately reach out to immediately reach out to my ortho friends at Mayo and Barrow, and just for advice on what we should do, who should we talk to, who should we see. So pretty quickly felt comfortable with the Dr. Papez, the electrophysiologist at Phoenix Children's, his boss, Wayne Franklin, Dr. Franklin. But we're also connected with Michael Ackerman, who's one of the doctors involved in Damar Hamlin's case and Bronny James's case, and he's kind of the guy as it relates to genetic heart conditions and research throughout the country. So getting him involved, I think, was has been pivotal. Maybe not impacting the recovery itself, but impacting what they're allowed to do now, because a lot of his research has focused on what can people that have these heart conditions, that have defibrillators, pacemakers put in, what should they be allowed to do, and what is worst case scenario. So his involvement's been instrumental in making that happen. And obviously a lot of the Mayo docs that you know as well, Dr. Anastasi and Justin Wilcox there, and Donnie Dooley and Jabra, and just all those guys that were just great at answering any questions. Who should I talk to? And Dr. Sherway over at Barrow just gave us peace of mind, and we wanted to make sure that we weren't taking in too much information. We're keeping our focus narrow, but the medical team that we had was great. So to be honest, like, it's one of those cases that everything had to go perfectly to have that kind of outcome. It's a 7 to 10% survival rate from out of the hospital cardiac arrest in kids. 7 to 10%, which is, but it's far less than that for 7 to 10 of those 7 to 10% to have normal cognitive function. So from CPR to the medics with Mesa Fire, to the helicopter pilots that took Pyper and made sure she was stable to have that ride, and the ER docs at and ICU docs at Phoenix Children's, to their specialist. Everyone had to do their job perfectly, or she doesn't make it, and at the very least, she makes it with impaired cognitive function. And so we're thankful for every person along that chain, from CPR to hospital discharge.
Yeah. And before hospital discharge, you mentioned that a defibrillator needed to be implanted. What were any of the other major milestones she had to meet before going home?
So within that, the first part was just weaning off of pain meds and opioids, and the paralytic that she was given. There are certain drugs that they give in ICU and only in ICU. So she had to wean off of those to be able to drop down to the cardiac floor. At the cardiac floor, she had to go through physical therapy, be able to walk, keep normal heart rhythm. She was on her EKG monitor. And then ultimately, part of that discharge was meeting with psych department for her, and then scheduling full appointment once we left the hospital. But the biggest parts were weaning off the paralytic, and in doing so, making sure that her heart rhythm and her brain function didn't change. And then once she was able to do that, they weaned her off of the pain meds. I mean, honestly, once she had the cooling devices off of her, everything else seemed to fall in place a little better. But I would say that was it's crazy that is standard of care for adults, but not kids in Arizona. It's standard of care for kids in a lot of other states, a lot of big states with children's hospitals like Ohio, Cleveland Clinic, and in Florida, but in Arizona, it's not standard. So that's why it was kind of easy sell to be part of that study here in Arizona.
How did Pyper handle like that psychological meeting? Because she's still just a kid. Did it even face her at all?
I think not, like, really remembering much of anything is a blessing for her. The hardest part was just dealing with all of the stuff she was waking back up to in the time that she lost. I mean, she hasn't outwardly exhibited much fear in going back and doing stuff, kind of the opposite of, feeling like it's not going to happen again, or they're never going to get shocked by their defibrillators, which is kind of the worst case scenario with a defibrillator. But I would say psychologically, she's handled it really, really well. I think it's been a little bit more challenge for her twin, who saw everything, is staring at potentially losing her best friend. And but hasn't had a cardiac arrest. So she doesn't have the same feelings that it could happen to her, but she knows that genetically she's the same. And so of the two, Emery, I think, has expressed more the fear symptoms than Pyper, but they probably handled it better than Dad has, to be honest, along the way. The resiliency of 12-year-olds. And, as the doctor said, there are a lot of kids that go through that experience and are super fearful. They haven't been those two.
Now, me being a twin, I completely understand just the love that twins have for each other. I'm not identical, but you kind of alluded to, which we'll talk about. Although Pyper went through this, she had that event, she had to get that implanted, but getting that diagnosis, hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, which causes a part of the heart to enlarge. And even though Emery did not present with symptoms, she still also needed to get tested. And then she also had a defibrillator implanted. And you kind of made a comment about how they mentioned they may not play again. First, tell me, how did you receive those news, and what was a message that you told kind of Emery before her having to go through something when she was perfectly okay at the moment?
Yeah, all great questions. Just kind of back up. I think as a dad of twins, I mean, you're a twin, so you get it with the feelings you have towards your twin. As a dad of twins, I think the greatest fear from birth on was that something would happen to one and not the other, that they would go through life without the other, or go through life different than the other, if there was some sort of cataclysmic event. And so I think even more so than losing both, it would be losing one and not the other, and dealing with just from a dad's perspective. And obviously, there's a lot of emotions that go into it. And I don't know what it's like to be a twin, but as a dad of twins, staring at one having a restricted life or losing their life, and the other having to live through that, has always been my greatest fear. So we're like staring at that in this process. The early part with Phoenix Children's, and Phoenix Children's works with lots of kids and some athletic kids, but a lot of kids that aren't. And so in some respect, I think they may have been a little bit behind some of the research that Dr. Ackerman had been doing with his cohort through the Yale study with defibrillator placement. So with their heart condition and everything, the initial message we got was they're probably not playing sports again. We'd followed up locally with a Mayo doc and got a little bit more optimistic view of, we're healthy, athletic people, try to, regularly working out, and fitness is part of our family. So we're trying to figure out like what is the most they're going to be able to do. And that looked like then they'll be able to work out, but playing sports and getting over 80% max heart rate is probably not a good idea. And then with the connections with Dr. Ackerman and his research with Mayo and meeting Phoenix Children's Hospital, the narrative changed a little bit. And it was funny because it was actually one of the news stories we had done, I think with Channel 12. And I'd been interviewed separately than Dr. Papez. And in that interview, they asked him, hey, do you think Pyper's going to play soccer again? And he's like, well, she's got a lot of positives going. She's young. She was really fit. She was strong. She was this, she was that, so I think it's a really good possibility. And I'm sitting there watching the news broadcast later that night going, well, that's kind of the first I've heard of that. So I reach out to Dr. Papez and we got on a Zoom for about an hour and kind of go through everything. And he brings up two of the studies, which Dr. Ackerman's part of. And at this point, we've got a appointment set up with Dr. Ackerman coming. But as I read the research, it says that this cohort that in the studies are two different studies of over 400 people, like none of the people that have had, and it's all at different ages, that have had a cardiac event, a cardiac arrest, have a defibrillator placed, or having a second cardiac arrest. So the defibrillator is able to abort any kind of arrhythmia. And even though it shocks the person with the defibrillator, they're not having a second cardiac arrest, therefore not dying. So that kind of changed everything for mom and dad here. As from my standpoint, it was always like, if playing sports again puts them at increased risk of dying, they're not going to play sports. For my wife, it was like, they're 12 years old. I want them to have a healthy life and And, from my end, it's like, if they're dead, they're not having a healthy life. So if it's an increased risk of dying, like we have to make that, adult decision. Yeah. But Dr. Ackerman's research has shown that that isn't the risk. It's a 0% chance. In his studies, 25% of the people get shocked. But half of those shocks are happening in everyday life. It's not even sports. So if those shocks can happen with them walking around, driving in a car, sitting at school, why shouldn't they go play sports? So that's kind of where everything led. As it relates to Emory, we're still early in this process, and they've chosen this plan that that Pyper needs to go through that involves pacemaker, defibrillator, and the residency doctors are kind of like, we're not really sure if Dr. Papez is going to recommend a defibrillator for Emory. Oh. At this point, they've already done her echo. She's already had a stress test. It's already shown her heart is very similar to Pyper's. Mm-hmm. I'm like, well, what are we waiting for her to have a cardiac arrest before this happens? And some of it, honestly, it's an insurance thing. It's that borderline preventative type treatment. But we were pretty adamant. I was pretty adamant right from the start that needs to be part of her plan, because even though, and Dr. Ackerman would say exactly this, even though we don't know 100% for sure that Emory needs one, we definitely don't know 100% for sure that she doesn't need one. Yeah. And if she needs one and nobody's around and she has a cardiac arrest, she's not going to make it. If she has a defibrillator inside of her and she has that same cardiac arrest that Pyper had, then she lives and then deals with, the defibrillator shock. And just to back up with Pyper, hers was in a practice, but it was 20 minutes into a practice. And for a soccer player, that's like nothing. That's a warm up. That's passing. They were doing a passing exercise into a 1v1. That's nothing. It wasn't like she'd been sprinting for an hour. They have a heart condition that can kick in with minimal activity, which would be, like I said, just you wrestling in the house or playing around with friends. So we knew that Emory needed that. Now, Emory's a pretty quiet kid. She's pretty stoic. I think it's taken her a lot to process it. But I do think as it relates to the psychological component, she feels a lot more secure in having it and having that layer of protection than she would without it. And I think
she already had it?
She had it. She had it about 6 weeks after Pyper.
Okay. So both of them have had it. Both of them have kind of fully recovered. I know they had some restrictions initially regarding to movement, doing activities. During that time, you did say you had some what ifs. What was the most what if moment in the back of your mind?
I think the what if that still is there is what happens if they do get shocked again. I think as they were going through, if they do not shocked again, but shocked, how do we manage that? As they were going through that, getting into back into sport process, and they were limited to reaching overhead and everything, there's an increased risk of damage to the lead that goes in the defibrillator, which can result in inappropriate shocks, which are when the device shocks you because it senses something's wrong with your heart, but nothing's wrong with the heart. It's just something wrong with the device. So that has always been a concern. I honestly, once I read Dr. Ackerman's research and got to talk with him extensively, talking with Dr. Sharaway as well, who talked to Dr. Ackerman, a lot of that, the what ifs kind of went away. We're in a state of dealing with, how their heart is going to progress over the next 10 years, dealing with if they do have any appropriate or inappropriate shocks. But as a parent and as a dad that, we're naturally, supposed to be able to protect our kids, especially our daughters, having the comfort that they can go out and do stuff and they have an internal medic in their chest that is going to fix whatever, AFib or VTAC or anything that could happen to their heart is a lot of comfort, that we don't have to be quite as concerned that someone's going to be there to do CPR. Initially, when they prior to reading the research and everything, when, even within the first week or two of leaving the hospital, they were going and hanging out with friends. And at this point, Emory had not had her defibrillator placement. So it was incredibly important. Whoever they were hanging out with had a parent trained in CPR, and they had a AED that was available because of the relationships I built through all of this with our heart friends. We did have a AED donated to their team from Gloria, one of the local reps for an AED company, which has been amazing to have that comfort level, not only for them, but for their teammates. So it's the what ifs are at this point really if they do suffer an appropriate or inappropriate shock, how will they deal with that mentally, and then what is that next step? And if it happens multiple times, what decisions need to be made as far as protecting them from that happening again? And some of that is outside of our control, which is always tough.
And before we talk about Pyper actually finally getting back to the pitch just in September, for the recovery for them, how long was it, and what was the clearance process like to start to do a little bit higher level activities?
Sure. Initially it's 6 weeks that they can't raise their arm overhead after the pacemaker defibrillator. They were allowed to do light exercise in those first 2 weeks. At 4 weeks, they were doing non-contact soccer stuff. We had them just back working with the coach on the side of their team. When they hit 6 weeks, that kind of coincided with our conversation with Dr. Papes at Phoenix Children's as it related to a clearance and what they could do. We had to push back the appointment with Dr. Ackerman from Mayo Rochester until they got a stress echo test. So they did a bike stress test. Throughout the test, they were receiving an echocardiogram which is an ultrasound test to their heart, at little intervals within the test. Their rep from their pacemaker company was there to monitor the device itself. They had EKGs hooked up. So there was kind of a 3-step process. Once we met with Dr. Papes, he cleared them to do non-contact and half field stuff until that 6-week point. They were then able to do contact and half field stuff. Once they passed 6 weeks, contact was okay. And but we wanted to wait, even though Mayo locally and Phoenix Children's here had pretty much fully cleared them at that point, until we met with Dr. Ackerman. At that point, we got a clearance for them to go back and play 11-a-side, and in games they did that at that point. So it's taken them a bit to reintegrate into their team. ECNL level, they were out a long time, but as far as clearance, it went from doing exercise without lifting their arms overhead to doing non-contact soccer stuff on the side at 4 weeks. After 6 weeks, doing half field stuff with their team and contact, and then ultimately full field, which timing I think would have been about 9 to 10 weeks, but that was more relative to getting that stress test and then waiting a couple weeks to see Dr. Ackerman. So all in, they probably would have been cleared about 8 weeks after Emery's defibrillator placement. And we waited for both of them to be cleared at the same point. Pyper would have been able to be cleared a little bit earlier just because she had her defibrillator put in early. But I jokingly kind of, even though along the way they kind of complained about what they could or couldn't do, I'm like, Pyper, you're probably the first kid to have a cardiac arrest, have a defibrillator implanted, and 7 weeks later be participating in a soccer practice at an ECNL level. And so that's kind of been their journey throughout. And honestly, it's been tough for, their coach and players. Like, he was concerned about the contact part of it, and honestly, their device, like theirs isn't a contact issue. It's how their heart reacts to different moments in time, which is exercise and not exercise. But the device getting damaged through contact would take, from what the doctor said, basically a horse kicking them in the collarbone and breaking the collarbone, a couple ribs, and still you've got this hard device with leads that are embedded into it, and still it's probably not going to damage the device. So so contact really wasn't an issue. It was them getting their fitness level back up and, transitioning from half field stuff to full field stuff.
Gotcha. And you talked about Pyper. Certainly she's a very active individual. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it stated 25 days after her cardiac arrest, she was back on that complex, just touching a ball. But it wasn't until September of this year she played her first ECNL match. And you wrote that at the time you didn't share with the public. You, I think, maybe posted about it 2 weeks later. What was that day like for your family?
It's pretty special. And like I said, it's, they kind of came back into an ECNL group that this all happened during tryouts. So we didn't even know if they're going to play this year. And, other players get picked on the team that maybe would or wouldn't. And they're coming back and trying to find some spot and playing time and such. And that day we weren't sure whether they're going to play or not.
And they both play on the same team, is that right?
They both are on the same team. They're both on the
right.
2010 ECNL team, which is under 14 at Arsenal. Honestly, I don't know if she would have played that day, but they had kind of gone through the roster and the player got hurt, so she got in the last 10 minutes of a 2-1 game and did well. So I'm honestly coaching another game behind it, and I hear Pyper get up and go in and kind of turn over, and took a couple quick pictures of her running onto the field. I'm trying to go back and finish my game and get back over, and obviously mom was there and enjoying the moment. Got some cool messages. I didn't post anything at the time because her twin sister Emery didn't get in the game, and so that was really disappointing for Emery that day. But like, with twins, it's one of those things that you don't want to not celebrate the one when the other maybe isn't getting the same thing. So it took a while to kind of process it for a couple weeks, and waited for Emery to kind of get onto the field for the first time too, and go through it. So it's really surreal, I think, is the word that comes to mind over and over, to watch her do that. When the visions of that day come back to me of just wondering if she's still going to be alive. So whether like I said, back at the watching your kids do stuff, but I mean really watching them do stuff, whether they play well or don't play well, or team has success or not, relatively them having the opportunity to succeed and fail because they're alive and able to be active and doing a sport they love is just amazing relative to what the story could have been. We could be sitting here in this podcast talking about heart conditions and prevention of these issues, and Pyper could not be with us, but we get to tell a recovery story, which I'm blessed and appreciative to be able to tell, because a lot of people get to tell the other story, and
and with you, and with you telling that story, I think it still needs to be heard about cardiac screening. As you mentioned earlier, you and your wife both physical therapists. I believe your wife's a physical therapist too.
Yes, she is.
Very active. Didn't have any health issues. I believe they might have found a slight abnormality in your heart. What message would you give to families when it comes to cardiac screening?
Yeah, and I have a recent story to kind of go with this. So being open with our story comes from the initial, we want people to pray for our daughter. We don't know if she's going to make it. And during that process, like I said, I got so many messages. I got so many messages from parents going, hey, and I'm talking countless, going, hey, our son suffered a cardiac arrest. They made it, they didn't make it. But during this process, we wanted people to listen and realize that the standard of care for cardiac screenings in our young athletes isn't sufficient, but nobody would listen to us. Could you please continue to use your voice, your platform, in order to make that happen? So, I mean, even within our soccer club, I've had parents who've lost a sibling that honestly I didn't know anything about. No, it wasn't brought to my attention. One of our girls had an older brother that was 24 at the time, but hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, running on a treadmill at his apartment complex, has a cardiac arrest, nobody there to save him, dies. Family tries to get word out, nothing happens. the standard of cardiac testing in our families and kids that don't have a pre-existing condition is just a stethoscope. A stethoscope is a piece of rubber, a piece of metal, some random doctor listening. And if you take 10 doctors in a room and ask them honestly, like, do you really expect to hear anything? They're like, well, maybe if it's glaring, but they'll also tell you that if somebody else hears something, they're looking at the piece of paper that says they found that. They're like, I don't really hear that. I don't know. So for a country that has so much medical technology, we have EKGs, we have echocardiograms. The twins' heart condition was easily identified from an echocardiogram. The first aid Pypers in the hospital asked, could it be anything else? And the doctor's like, no, it's this, showing pictures, and there's not a doubt. That test is readily available anywhere. It's not standard of care through American Heart Association, and therefore not with the American Medical Association. I've had people tell me it has nothing to do with whether insurance companies want to pay for the test or not. We all know that's not true, because it's classified as a preventative test if there's no family history. But there's multiple layers of financial reason that these tests aren't ordered. There was a study put out with American Heart Association, I forget which journal, that said that there were 7,200 out of the hospital sudden cardiac arrest in under 19-year-olds in 2019. So right before COVID. 7 to 10% survival rate. So that means 5,000 under 19-year-olds are dying from sudden cardiac death out of the hospital every year. That study came from looking at 8 states in the United States and Canada and extrapolating to our whole country. Resuscitation Journal took 48 states and the EMS data for all their calls over the course of 2016, again, before COVID, so COVID's not impactful on it, found out that number of out of the hospital sudden cardiac arrest in under 19-year-olds was 23,000. Of which 7 to 10% survival rate. So if you do the math, 20,000 out of the hospital under 19-year-olds are going to die every year. Some of those are kids we knew had a heart condition, they just weren't in the hospital. But many of those are just like my daughter that we had no idea. We're healthy. You look at us, and all we got was from really, really good doctors. We got a stethoscope test and nothing showed up. Our kids have a heart condition that it would be 1 in a million for them to catch those moments that their heart would flutter in a way that would show up on a stethoscope. But within, 30 seconds on an echocardiogram, it's like, there it is. There is a local foundation, the Anthony Bates Foundation. Most states have them. Sharon Bates, mom of Anthony, the son went to Mountain Point High School, went off to University of Kansas football, died of sudden cardiac death at University of Kansas from hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. And mom was told right after, like, hey, what test should I have had on my kid in order to have saved his life? Echocardiogram, EKG. So now she provides those for $45 for kids in Arizona, $90 for adults. In order to provide peace of mind and protection. The story I have to share is, and it's one of the things that, I thought about in the hospital is how could my doctor, my pediatrician that the kids see, not have recommended more? If you look at the statistics, whether it's 5,000 sudden cardiac deaths or 20,000, that's too many. Like, why would someone not tell someone, the parents of young athletes, like, hey, you might want to do these tests just to be sure? And so, I didn't go to their follow-up appointment when they left the hospital. I really haven't followed up with them at all. But we have friends who have 3 kids around our age, and they go to the same practice. And they asked one of the doctors, hey, we would like a script to get an echocardiogram EKG for our kids. And the doctor tells them, same practice, we don't think you need it. And they're like, well, I don't understand. We know the Midkiffs, and their daughter had, a heart condition nobody knew anything about, including you. And she could have died and is very fortunate. So we'd like to just make sure. Well, it's not standard of care, so we don't recommend it. So that for me is absolutely mind-numbing. As a parent of someone who almost lost their daughter, to have a physician group that's very intimate with the case say that they would not in any way change what they're doing, because it's not standard care. So in a nutshell, standard care needs to get better. It needs to get better for your kids in the future. It needs to get better for everybody else's, because the reality is that many kids have heart conditions we know nothing about. We found out in a very, very hard way, but most parents find out they have a genetic condition when they lose a child. And insurance and the medical field is basically saying, hey, you need to have one of these events in order to get on the list to do these tests for your family in the future. And if you haven't had one of these events, we don't want to pay for it. Insurance companies, we're not going to recommend it. And honestly, if you're a doctor, you're not going to recommend test after test after test that insurances don't pay for. So American Heart Association, American Medical Association, and the physician groups need to get together with insurance, and we need to do better for our kids, because like a piece of rubber hose and a piece of metal and a random doctor listening isn't good enough. It wasn't good enough for my family, and we almost lost a kid. It's not been good enough for the 3 families in the last 2 weeks that messaged me that their kid just had a cardiac arrest and would like to connect with me to get more information about what we know at this point. It's happening everywhere. There are some blips because of COVID, but our kids' heart conditions have nothing to do with COVID. And prior to that, we were already losing 20,000 kids a year. So this is a thing that has been a thing for a long time. The standard of how we're testing our kids has not changed, and it just has to change. And I'm the last person you're going to convince it shouldn't change.
Yeah. And that's hard to hear. I'm not a parent, but I think even with this incident, even though insurance doesn't cover it, I feel like even as a parent, I would be trying to find other measures to make sure my child is getting screened. Now, after this incident, you said that your lens is far more clear. I want to know, what do you really see differently, Matt?
I've been involved in, the competitive sports world for a long time. And that part of it is fun, and I love the competition. But the reality of time spent with kids, the reality of the importance of trying to be a parent and guide them through their journey, getting outside of my own bubble. And, as a PT, I help as many people that can come through my clinic, and hopefully outside of that through social media and such. But and that has always given me value in my career of helping those people. But the mission is bigger, because life and death is huge. So seeing a platform and the ability to just go, I love your kids, I love mine, and we need to help them and be better for them. And having that perspective that's not just in my own little bubble, I think has been one of the most important life lessons. And the obvious one is obviously cherishing every second and taking a little bit more time off and enjoying every moment, getting through those times when your teenage girls are acting like teenage girls to you. Just recognizing again that the fact that they can act that way to you is a blessing, that they have that opportunity at this point in time. So it's we're blessed for every second we have with them. Like I said, I feel very led to continue to spread the word on pediatric screening, youth clubs doing a better job of being involved and helping bring awareness to this condition, and hope that we're as helpful as possible with moving that ball forward. And know that the foundation I was talking to earlier, since Pyper's incident, they've had a full house of screening, testing times and dates. The publicity of her situation amplified people going and protecting their kids. I've had people message us as it relates to them finding stuff and doing things to protect their kids. So these screenings are leading to already parents finding out more, but it needs to be standard that it's being done. Lots of high schools are doing big screenings. Arsenal's going to do a big screening day for for the whole club on December 9th, I think. So that'll be another great event for more people to get tested, and as well as pushing the bar that everyone in the world needs to be CPR certified, because CPR is what gave Pyper a chance to have the doctors and the medics take care of her from there if she didn't get that. So if you're not CPR certified, go get CPR certified. If you don't feel internally you'd be able to do it, at least you can help and know how you can help. If you run a business, a facility, have an action plan on how the ambulance can get into your facility, how people can get taken care of, who can bring them in, where the AED is. If you don't have an AED, go get one. Know how to use it. Get all your staff trained. Paid for my whole staff to get CPR trained like 2 weeks after it, which was already something it was expected everyone was, but I think each of us need to take personal responsibility that we need to do everything we can to protect the people around us.
I agree. Everyone, not medical professionals, every single person needs to understand CPR. Finally, I want to end it off with something that you said about Pyper. Even though she's not here, you talked about when Pyper and Emery kind of get into it. Pyper will sometimes say with a mischievous smile, "So I pretty much saved your life, in case you didn't know." Twins really do have a special connection. They love each other deeply. Definitely a sassy girl. And if there was one thing that you'd want us to take away from Pyper's personality, what would that be?
Yeah, it's funny because she said that many times, and Emery always throws back, "Well, I'm 2 minutes older," so which has been a lifetime of doing that. I think their twins are identically the same, genetically the same, within fractions of each other, but different. And Pyper kind of lives up to that name. She's sassy, spunky, wears her heart on the sleeve, precocious, definitely is dropped into that smart alecky realm. But I would say this, beyond all that, she's a kid that loves to pour her love and kindness into others, doesn't understand if she doesn't get that back from people, because time and time again, she tries to, I'm proud as a father because she tries to treat others the right way and be kind. And she loves being a friend to others that'll be a friend back to her. And as much as her sisters, they get into it, they have this built-in best friend that if one of them is down, the other's going to lift the other up. And Pyper is great that way. Emery's great that way. Yeah. And then they go back to bashing their heads against each other again. So
sounds like twins.
Yeah.
That's great. And that kindness, even though I've never met your entire family, it's in you too, because you've always been nothing but kind and generous with your time. So I want to personally thank you from the bottom of my heart for speaking with me, because as you mentioned, you're super busy, but you always are so generous. And I will always be thankful to you for my time in Arizona, and certainly especially for you sharing this story, because I think it's going to keep putting the word out there for many families, and hopefully we're going to see less of these kids getting missed that could be preventable. So thank you.
No, so appreciate you too. And parents, get your kids tested, find the foundation in town that'll do it if insurances won't do it for you. And even if they don't find anything, it's peace of mind for those of you that are worried that life is normal. And if you find something, it may change that. The medical advancements allow you to find something, treat it, and still have your kids go on with a normal life. So you want to know rather than not know and hope something doesn't happen. So get your kids tested and push your doctors to push their insurance companies to offer a more comprehensive testing other than a stethoscope.
There you have it.
Thank you for tuning in once again. Please make sure you rate, share with your colleagues, because like I keep saying, more content is coming your way.